The Most Dangerous Women in America's Prisons, True Crime Documentary. Inside the razor-wired walls of America's toughest women's prisons, danger doesn't always wear a mask. Sometimes, it wears makeup. From cold-blooded masterminds to fearless gang leaders, these women earned reputations that made even correctional officers afraid to call their names out loud. The story begins at California's Central California Women's Facility, CCWF, the largest women's prison in the United States. Rows of gray concrete blocks stretch across the yard, and guards stand with rifles high above the fence line. But the real fear isn't outside, it's inside, among the inmates themselves. In cell block C, a woman everyone calls Red runs the tier like she owns it. Her real name is Veronica Cruz. Once part of a notorious Los Angeles gang, Red built her own empire behind bars, smuggling contraband, controlling inmates, and even bribing staff. When a new inmate accidentally took her seat at the lunch table, it started what officers later described as a war zone in slow motion. Trays hit the ground. Guards shouted. In less than a minute, 4 inmates were on the floor. Red didn't move, she just watched, calm as ever, while others fought for her respect. But Red isn't the only one. Across the country, in the icy walls of Bedford Hills Correctional Facility in New York, lives another legend, Tonya T-Bird Harris. Convicted for orchestrating one of the most shocking robberies in New York's history, Tonya wasn't afraid of violence. In prison, she turned her anger into control. Inmates followed her not because they liked her, but because they were afraid to cross her. Guards learned never to approach her cell alone. Even after years in solitary confinement, Tonya's voice still echoes through the halls, like a warning to anyone who dares disrespect her. And then there's Samantha Bell, a quiet woman serving a life sentence in Florida Women's Reception Center. On the surface, she looks harmless, polite, educated, even soft-spoken. But beneath that calm face lies one of the most calculated criminal minds ever to walk into a women's facility. Samantha once led a ring of women who tricked wealthy men into dangerous situations. Her nickname inside? The Widow. Because every man who crossed her ended up broke, missing, or worse. Each of these women represents a side of danger that most people never imagine: the power of control, manipulation, and fear without needing brute strength. They're proof that prison isn't just about bars and walls, it's about who rules within them. The question is, how did they get this far? And what really happens when the most dangerous women in America share the same yard? The queen of the cell block. At Central California Women's Facility, every inmate knows the same rule: don't cross Red. Veronica Cruz has been locked up for over 15 years, serving multiple life sentences for murder and drug trafficking. But inside, her influence only grew stronger. She runs a network so organized, even the guards admit, nothing moves without her say-so. In the mornings, she walks the yard with 2 women behind her like bodyguards. Tattoos mark her skin, stories of loyalty, loss, and power. Her cell is spotless, almost like an office. She keeps notebooks full of coded messages, her version of ledgers, tracking who owes her favors, who's loyal, and who's next in line for punishment. New inmates quickly learn that Red can be both protector and predator. She'll offer you a bar of soap, a packet of ramen, but everything comes with a price. If you take her help, you owe her something, sometimes a favor, sometimes silence. One officer recalls a day when Red intervened in a yard fight between 2 younger inmates. Instead of joining the chaos, she stepped in, grabbed one by the arm, and whispered something. The fight stopped instantly. Both girls nodded and walked away. Later, cameras caught those same girls scrubbing Red's cell floors for hours. To the outside world, she's just another inmate. But inside CCWF, Red's word is law. Her control doesn't come from fear alone, it comes from her ability to read people. She knows who's breaking down, who's desperate, who's lying. She's the kind of woman who could make enemies work for her. Even officers tread carefully. You can't outsmart her, one said. She doesn't fight with fists anymore, she fights with strategy. But what truly makes Red dangerous isn't her past, it's her calm. No shouting, no threats, no rage. She smiles as she wins. And when a woman like that rules from behind bars, even the strongest realize, this prison has its own government, and she's the president. The shadow of Bedford Hills. T-Bird's reign of fear. Bedford Hills Correctional Facility sits quietly north of New York City, but behind those cold gray walls, silence never lasts long. The inmates call it the Hill, and it's the kind of place where one wrong word can decide if you sleep peacefully or not at all. And at the center of that fear was Tonya, T-Bird, Harris. T-Bird wasn't the kind of woman who needed to shout to get attention. Her reputation spoke for her. Before prison, she led a robbery crew that pulled off some of the boldest heists in Brooklyn, banks, armored trucks, even jewelry stores in broad daylight. When she was finally caught, the judge said, "You were fearless to the point of madness." Inside Bedford Hills, T-Bird didn't change, she adapted. She understood one rule: control means survival. While most inmates were trying to keep their heads down, T-Bird studied every weakness, guards, cameras, schedules, even who brought what to the yard. Within a year, she had built a small circle of loyal followers, women who would do anything for her, run messages, handle disputes, even intimidate rivals. To the guards, she was trouble in human form. Her eyes told you that she saw everything, even when she wasn't looking. She had this habit of tapping her fingers on the table, slowly, rhythmically, like a ticking clock before something bad happened. There's a story correctional officers still talk about. An officer once tried to move T-Bird to a different cell block after a fight. She didn't argue. She just smiled and said, "I'll see you on your next shift." The next morning, the officer found his car tires slashed in the staff parking lot. No cameras caught anyone, but everyone knew who ordered it. Her control didn't come from chaos. It came from strategy. When she wanted someone out of her way, she didn't fight, she isolated them. She spread rumors, broke alliances, and watched as her rivals destroyed each other. By the time the truth came out, it was too late. But behind her power was a dark loneliness. Some nights, after lockdown, guards would pass her cell and see her writing letters, dozens of them. To her daughter, to her mother, to people who never wrote back. She'd tear them up when she was done, as if to erase who she once was. T-Bird once told a counselor, "Out there, I had power because I wasn't afraid to die. In here, I have power because I'm not afraid to be forgotten." That's what made her truly dangerous. Not the violence, but the emptiness that came with it. And even now, years after her time in solitary, inmates whisper her name like a warning. Because in Bedford Hills, some women fight to survive. T-Bird? She fought to rule. The widow of Florida, Samantha Bell's web of lies. Florida's Women's Reception Center looks like any other correctional facility. Tall fences, metal gates, and orange uniforms moving in quiet lines. But inside, there's one name that everyone whispers with caution: Samantha Bell. Unlike most inmates, Samantha didn't come from the streets. She came from money, a private school graduate, fluent in 2 languages, and once married to a successful businessman. But behind her calm voice and soft eyes was a mind that could twist reality itself. Before prison, Samantha led what police later called a network of emotional assassins. She convinced other women to seduce and rob wealthy men, using charm, manipulation, and fear. Her nickname, the Widow, came after one of those men turned up dead under suspicious circumstances. No one could prove she ordered it, but everyone believed she did. When Samantha arrived at the prison, she didn't act tough. She didn't raise her voice or pick fights. She waited, observed, learned the system like a chessboard. Within months, she was writing letters for illiterate inmates, helping them with legal paperwork and earning their trust. But every favor she gave was a string she could pull later. Guards underestimated her at first. She looked fragile, polite, even helpful. But one correctional officer noticed something strange. Samantha always seemed to know things she shouldn't. Who was getting transferred? Who was under investigation? Who had money in their commissary? Soon, inmates started disappearing from her circle, shipped to other prisons, caught with contraband, or mysteriously attacked. But no one could trace it back to her. Her hands always looked clean. One inmate said, "She doesn't fight you. She makes you fight yourself." In the prison library, Samantha ran her operation quietly. She'd sit by the window, writing letters that looked innocent, but they weren't. Hidden in the flowery words were coded messages for her contacts outside. Investigators later discovered that she used those letters to keep her old scams alive, from behind bars. Her charm worked even on staff. She convinced one officer to smuggle in small luxuries, perfume, pens, even chocolates. When he was caught, he refused to name her. He said, "She made me feel like I mattered." Samantha's power wasn't in fear, it was in persuasion. She made people believe that helping her was their choice. That's what made her so dangerous. Other inmates ruled with fists, but Samantha ruled with psychology. If Red was the president and T-Bird was the general, the widow was the puppet master. But Samantha's past still haunted her. She'd often sit on her bunk, staring at a faded photograph of her son, the only person she ever truly loved. To her, every scheme, every lie, every manipulation was just another way to stay in control in a world that once took everything from her. Even years later, officers describe her the same way, calm, polite, and terrifying. Because in a place built to break you, Samantha Bell proved that the most dangerous weapon isn't violence, it's intelligence. The Silent Enforcer, life inside Louisiana's St. Gabriel Prison. Deep in the swamps of Louisiana sits St. Gabriel Correctional Center for women, surrounded by cypress trees, thick humidity, and the constant buzz of insects. But what really makes this place feel alive is the fear. Because here, one woman earned a name that still makes inmates tense up when they hear it whispered in the dorms: Charlene "Ice" Porter. Ice wasn't born violent, she became it. She grew up in Baton Rouge, a quiet child who spoke little and smiled less. Her father was gone before she turned 10, her mother hooked on pills, and by 16, Charlene was already running errands for local drug dealers. By 21, she was known across the city as the enforcer, the woman who didn't talk, didn't threaten, didn't argue. She just acted. The story that sent her to prison became local legend. One night, a rival crew tried to rob her boss. Charlene didn't call for help. She walked into the room with a sawed-off shotgun and handled it herself. Nobody in that room ever forgot her face. Emotionless, calm, cold. That's when the streets started calling her Ice. At St. Gabriel, Ice carried that same energy. She never raised her voice. She never joined fights unless she had to, but when she did, it ended quickly. Other inmates noticed that even the loudest troublemakers went quiet when she walked by. Her stare could freeze the air around her. Guards said she had a strange way of maintaining order. When two inmates started arguing, she'd step between them, say one word, "Stop." And they would. Nobody wanted to test her patience. She had the kind of presence that didn't need backup. But Ice wasn't just about intimidation, she had a code. She hated bullies. When older inmates tried to take advantage of newcomers, Ice was the first to intervene. She'd protect those who couldn't defend themselves, but never for free. She'd say, "Respect is earned in silence." And in her world, silence was loyalty. One officer told a story about a lockdown that nearly turned into a riot. Inmates were shouting, throwing trays, refusing orders. Then Ice stood up in the middle of the chaos, looked around the dorm, and said calmly, "Y'all are just making it worse." Within seconds, the yelling stopped. Even the guards were stunned. She didn't work for the system, but when things went bad, she kept peace her own way. Still, behind that control was a broken soul. At night, when lights went out, Ice would write letters she never sent, to her little sister, who'd grown up without her. In one of those letters found years later, she wrote, "If I could freeze time, I'd go back to before I became this person. But you can't melt what's already ice." That's the kind of pain that changes a person. She never cried, never begged, never complained, but her eyes told the truth. She wasn't proud of who she became, she just knew she couldn't survive any other way. In St. Gabriel, Ice ruled the yard not with threats, but with control. She was the balance between chaos and calm, the unspoken leader who could turn violence off with a glance. And when word spread that she might be transferred to another facility, even the hardest inmates whispered the same thing. "If Ice leaves, this place will burn." Because sometimes, The most dangerous woman in the room isn't the loudest, it's the one who doesn't need to speak at all. The Empire of Fear, when the most dangerous women cross paths. By 2018, the U.S. federal system was tightening transfers between high-risk female inmates. The goal was to separate troublemakers, but sometimes, fate brings danger together. In a quiet wing of a federal facility in Texas, a place built for the hardest women in the country, 3 names appeared on the same roster for the first time. Veronica, Red Cruz. Tonya, T-Bird, Harris. Samantha, the Widow Bell. They were never supposed to meet, but overcrowding forced the Bureau of Prisons to house them under one roof. The staff called it Unit X, the inmates called it Hell Row. From the first day, tension filled the air like static before a storm. Red ran the block from instinct. Quiet commands, coded signals. She had connections in every kitchen and laundry crew, still moving small contraband through old favors. T-Bird stayed in the shadows at first, watching, waiting. She'd been down this road before, never rush, never trust. And the widow? She was already planting seeds. Within a week, she'd convinced 2 guards that she was different, that she'd changed, the same lies she'd told 100 times before. Guards knew something was brewing. Every inmate followed one of the 3, but no one dared to take sides publicly. It wasn't a question of if something would happen. It was a question of when. The first spark. It started small, a missing radio from the rec room. No one claimed it, but whispers blamed Red's people. T-Bird's crew confronted them in the yard, words turned into shoves, shoves turned into chaos. The guards broke it up, but the message was clear, war was coming. That night, the unit went into lockdown. Doors slammed, lights dimmed, and the tension became unbearable. Through the metal bars, Red and T-Bird locked eyes. No shouting, no threats, just a stare that could cut through steel. Then, out of nowhere, Samantha Bell stepped in, calm, smiling. She offered to negotiate between them. But Red didn't trust her charm. "You play both sides, widow," she said quietly. Samantha smiled back. "That's why I always win." The alliance no one expected. Days later, during a work shift in the laundry unit, the 3 found themselves alone for the first time. No guards, no cameras, just the hum of the dryers. Red leaned against a table. T-Bird crossed her arms. Samantha folded towels like she didn't have a care in the world. Red broke the silence. "We can fight each other and give these guards what they want, or we can take this place for ourselves." T-Bird didn't answer right away. Her pride wouldn't let her follow anyone. But she respected Red's courage. She saw the same cold fire in her eyes. Samantha grinned faintly. "Empires don't fall from the outside," she said. "They rot from within. Maybe it's time we test how strong theirs really is." That moment marked the birth of the Silent Empire, a loose, unspoken alliance among 3 of the most dangerous women ever locked up together. They didn't share loyalty. They shared a goal, control. The unraveling. It didn't take long for chaos to follow. Within a month, staff reported unexplained cooperation between rival groups, fights stopped without reason, supplies went missing but reappeared days later, and guards noticed that certain inmates suddenly behaved too well. Behind it all were 3 women. One with power, one with fear, and one with manipulation. Red made the rules. T-Bird enforced them. The widow ensured no one saw it coming. But alliances built on power never last forever. When the administration transferred Ice Porter from Louisiana to Texas, everything changed. Ice was calm, respected, and never played politics. The staff hoped she'd stabilize the unit. But what they didn't realize was that Ice had her own definition of peace. Within a week of her arrival, she quietly dismantled Red's control, refusing to follow her rules. T-Bird tested her once, and backed off after one stare. The widow tried to manipulate her, and failed for the first time in years. In a place full of loud danger, Ice was the quiet earthquake no one saw coming. From that day, the empire began to crumble from within, not through violence, but through silence. One woman sought power, one craved respect, and one wanted redemption. But Ice? She only wanted peace, even if it meant burning everything down to get it. And that's where their stories began to twist together and apart. Because when you lock the most dangerous women in America under one roof, it's not a prison anymore. It's a powder keg. The meltdown, when the system finally fights back. By early 2019, Unit X had become the most unpredictable wing in the entire U.S. federal women's system. The prison administration couldn't explain it. Fights had dropped, yet control was slipping. Guards followed orders more cautiously, cameras malfunctioned too often, and inmates seemed to obey an invisible rulebook that didn't come from the warden. Behind it all were the same four names: Red, T-Bird, the Widow, and Ice. Each with her own motive. Each slowly realizing the system had started watching them. The Whisper Network. It began with an audit, a quiet one. The Bureau of Prisons sent in an internal affairs officer named Agent Monroe, a calm, sharp-eyed investigator who had seen everything except what he was about to uncover. Monroe didn't storm in with questions, he listened. He noticed that inmates paused mid-sentence whenever Red's name came up. He saw guards hesitate before logging reports. He saw one correctional officer nervously shred a paper after speaking with the widow. Something was wrong. By the second week, the warden ordered every letter, every call, every visitor monitored. That's when they caught the first clue, a coded message hidden in a drawing mailed out by Samantha Bell. The words looked like random poetry, but the pattern of letters spelled something chilling. Control is quiet. The administration realized what they were dealing with wasn't chaos. It was coordination. These women weren't fighting the system. They were the system now, at least inside their block. So, the Bureau of Prisons made a decision: break the chain. Divide and contain. One cold morning, the lights came on at 4 a.m., hours earlier than usual. Guards in riot gear marched through Unit X. Doors slammed open. Inmates shouted. Red, T-Bird, the Widow, and Ice were all pulled from their cells simultaneously. But as guards dragged them down the hall, something unexpected happened. No one resisted. Red just smirked. T-Bird looked bored. The Widow smiled faintly, as if she had planned this moment. And Ice? She just walked, eyes calm, hands cuffed, as if she had seen this before. Each woman was placed in different facilities across the country, maximum isolation. The system believed separating them would restore order. But instead, it exposed just how deep their influence had already spread. The infection of control. 2 weeks after the transfers, incidents began popping up in each prison they were sent to. At Red's new facility in Arizona, contraband rings reappeared overnight, using her old codes. At Bedford's East Unit in New York, guards found notes signed with a small bird, T-Bird's old symbol. In Florida, a staff member was fired after being caught sneaking perfume bottles into Samantha Bell's cell. And in Louisiana, Ice quietly stopped a full-scale brawl before it even began, just by standing up. The system realized too late. The women hadn't needed to be together. They had planted their influence in every prison they'd ever touched. It wasn't about friendship. It was about legacy. Agent Monroe wrote in his report, "We thought we were breaking them apart. But all we did was give them new kingdoms to rule." The turning point. Months later, an anonymous letter arrived at the Bureau of Prisons headquarters in D.C. It was written in perfect handwriting, no signature, no smudges. You can lock the body but not the mind. The game doesn't end until we say so. It was postmarked from Louisiana. No one ever confirmed who sent it. But the timing matched a report from St. Gabriel. A new inmate had arrived, quiet, disciplined, and eerily familiar. She didn't talk much, but her eyes, cold and calm, reminded everyone of Ice Porter. Rumors spread across the correctional system that the four women, separated by miles and walls, had somehow found a way to keep communicating. Through letters hidden in books. Through guards they turned. Through fear itself. The system was cracking and everyone knew it. The reckoning. 1 year later, a guard at the Texas federal facility where it all began found a message scratched faintly into the back of a steel toilet in Unit X. The empire sleeps, but it never dies. When investigators asked who might have written it, no one answered. But on the tier, inmates exchanged quiet smiles. Because for them, the legend of Red, T-Bird, the Widow, and Ice wasn't just a story, it was a warning. A reminder that power doesn't need guns or gangs. Sometimes, it just needs women who refuse to be broken. And that's how the system learned the hardest truth of all. You can build the strongest walls in America, but if you put the most dangerous women behind them, those walls will eventually belong to them. The legacy, how their names still haunt the system today. Years have passed since Unit X was quietly shut down and its inmates scattered across the country. But inside the American correctional system, their names still echo, whispered in cell blocks, mentioned in staff briefings, and recorded in reports stamped confidential. Each woman left something behind. Not just fear, but influence, and in some strange way, a form of power that never truly disappeared. Veronica read Cruz, the ghost queen of CCWF. At the Central California Women's Facility, new inmates still hear the same line during orientation. Don't sit where Red used to sit. Her seat, in the far corner of the cafeteria, is left empty out of superstition. Though she's now locked away in a federal isolation unit, Red's legacy still controls the flow of contraband and communication inside the prison. Because she built a structure that didn't rely on her presence, it relied on loyalty and fear. Even now, coded notes surface in commissary bags. Simple drawings, a red X or a single rose, mark who's safe to trust. Officers destroy them when they're found, but for every note they burn, another one appears. A retired guard once said, "Red didn't run a prison gang. She ran a prison government." And to this day, her organization still moves like a shadow, quiet, precise, untouchable. Tonya T. Bird, Harris, the silent rule of Bedford Hills. At Bedford Hills Correctional Facility in New York, T. Bird's legend remains unshakable. You can still find her name carved into the concrete near the gym, T. Bird Lives. Even though she's serving time in a facility upstate, the hierarchy she built years ago still defines how the inmates there operate. She introduced a system of order, a strange kind of discipline among chaos. You didn't steal from another inmate's locker. You didn't snitch. You didn't disrespect staff who showed fairness. Those rules, simple as they were, kept the peace for years. One inmate told a social worker, "T. Bird didn't make prison safer. She made it predictable. And that's the closest thing we have to peace in here." She wasn't a hero, but she was proof that leadership can exist even in hell, and sometimes it wears a scowl and a scar. Samantha, the widow bull, the voice beyond the walls. Florida's Women's Reception Center still remembers her, not for her violence, but for her manipulation. Samantha's story didn't end in silence. From her cell, she began writing essays for a criminal justice reform magazine, using a pseudonym. Her words were calm, intellectual, persuasive, just like her. Readers didn't know the truth, that Grace Holloway, the author of The Psychology of Control and Confinement, was in fact one of the most manipulative inmates in U.S. history. Through her writing, Samantha reshaped her image. Advocates began citing her essays in university lectures, unaware that they were reading the words of the widow. Even in isolation, she found a way to regain influence. Her words traveled farther than her schemes ever did. And some say that's the most dangerous evolution of all, when a manipulator learns how to sound like a reformer. Charlene Ice Porter, the myth of St. Gabriel. In Louisiana, Ice became something else entirely, a legend. After her transfer from Texas, she never caused another incident. She kept to herself, followed rules, and worked in the kitchen. But whenever a fight broke out, she was the first person the warden called to help calm it down. No one ever saw her raise her voice, yet violence always stopped when she appeared. One correctional officer described her best. "She's not an inmate. She's the storm before peace." Rumors say she now runs a quiet mentorship program for younger prisoners, teaching them how to survive without losing themselves. No one knows if it's true, but one thing's certain, no one disrespects ICE. Not even now. A system still afraid of them. After Unit X's shutdown, the Bureau of Prisons introduced a new internal protocol called Directive 14-9, unofficially nicknamed the Red Policy. It's designed for one purpose: to prevent women with influence from forming alliances. Transfers are randomized. Letters are screened twice. And any sign of organized inmate control triggers an immediate lockdown. But even with all those precautions, the system still can't erase the fear that these women inspired. Every warden, every new officer, every rookie counselor hears their names during training. The widow. For women who turned concrete cells into thrones. The legacy lives on. Inmates still tell stories about them at night. Some say Red's coded system of trust still circulates in prisons across California. Others claim the widow's letters of wisdom are still copied and passed around as motivational quotes. And some swear that ICE still writes to the families of inmates she once protected, quietly helping from the shadows. These women didn't escape their sentences. They didn't walk free. But they found a different kind of freedom, the power to shape the world inside the walls. They proved that danger doesn't end with a cell door. Sometimes, it evolves behind it. Their story became a warning, not just to the system, but to anyone who underestimates the human will. You can chain the body. You can silence the voice. But power, real power, survives even in confinement. And somewhere tonight, in some dimly lit cell, a new inmate is learning the rules, whispering to herself the same words that once echoed through Unit X. In here, queens don't die, they just change prisons. Inside the new generation, the daughters of the empire, time moves differently inside prison walls. Guards retire. Wardens transfer. The news cycle forgets. But legends, they don't fade. They evolve. And years after Red, T-Bird, the widow, and ICE were separated, a new generation of inmates began to rise. Women who never met them, yet live by the codes they left behind. Inmates call them the daughters. The birth of a new era. It started at the Central California Women's Facility, the same place where Red once ruled. Young inmates began passing around scraps of paper with 3 simple words written in red ink. Respect. Loyalty. Silence. To the guards, it looked harmless, a motivational quote, maybe even something from group therapy. But inside the cell blocks, everyone knew exactly what it meant. It was Red's code reborn. One woman in particular stood out. Marisol Vega, a 25-year-old serving 10 years for armed robbery. She had fiery eyes, quick hands, and a kind of street charisma that reminded the older inmates of someone they used to fear. They started calling her Little Red. But Marisol wasn't trying to imitate anyone. She wanted control, and she understood the system better than most. She'd grown up hearing stories about the women who ruled prisons before her, whispered through bus rides, halfway houses, and county jails. Now, she was writing the next chapter. The copycat at Bedford Hills. Meanwhile, in New York's Bedford Hills, another name began circulating, Alicia Moore, a soft-spoken inmate with tattoos of birds running down her forearm. No one knew what they meant until one day she told a fellow prisoner. The bird flies when the cage opens. They called her Baby T. Alicia had studied psychology before her arrest. She used her education to understand people, officers, inmates, even counselors. She knew when to speak and when to stay quiet. She created small circles of influence, women who protected each other, shared commissary, and stayed united. When fights broke out, Alicia wasn't in them, but her people always came out on top. She didn't crave violence, she craved order. Just like T-Bird once did. The widow's reflection in Florida. At Florida's Women's Reception Center, staff noticed a spike in well-written grievance letters, articulate, calm, and signed by the same inmate, Naomi Bell. The last name caught their attention. Yes, she was related. Samantha Bell's niece. Naomi grew up watching documentaries about her aunt, reading news articles that painted her as a monster. But she saw something different. She saw a woman who refused to disappear. Inside prison, Naomi didn't use charm the same way Samantha did. Instead, she used information. She volunteered in the library, gaining access to files, case law, and appeal records. Whenever an inmate needed help, Naomi offered it, for a price. Nothing's free, she'd say with a soft smile. And once you owed her, you never really paid it off. Sound familiar? It should. She wasn't just carrying the widow's bloodline. She was carrying her legacy. The return of ICE. And then there was Louisiana. At St. Gabriel Correctional Center, a rumor began circulating among the newer inmates. They said Ice Porter was still there, older now, quieter, but watching. Some say she spends her mornings walking the yard, keeping to herself. Others say she mentors young inmates, warning them not to make her mistakes. But the strangest thing? Whenever she speaks to them, she uses the same 3 words from that old code: respect, loyalty, silence. One young inmate, barely 19, described her encounter to a counselor. She looked at me and said, "Don't be loud to be seen. Be calm to be heard." That's when I knew who she was. ICE's presence is still the invisible glue that holds the peace in that facility. No one dares disrespect her. Even the guards admit, they feel safer when she's around. The circle reforms. By 2024, separate reports from California, New York, Florida, and Louisiana all describe the same pattern. New, young inmates forming structured alliances under 3 principles. No violence unless necessary. No betrayal under any circumstance. No noise that draws attention. To the Bureau of Prisons, it looked like a harmless cultural shift. But to the veterans who'd survived the old days of Unit X, it looked like the rebirth of something familiar. One internal memo leaked years later read, "We may be witnessing the decentralized legacy of Red, T-Bird, the Widow, and ICE, not through communication, but through imitation. The empire hasn't returned. It evolved. A legacy that refuses to die. The daughters of the empire don't wear crowns. They don't shout orders. But their power lives in small things. A glance, a nod, a shared look of understanding. The prisons have changed, but the rules are the same. Power can't be taken. It has to be earned. Respect isn't demanded. It's given in fear. Somewhere tonight, a new inmate will walk through the gates for the first time, confused, angry, terrified. And in the corner of the yard, a quiet woman will nod to her and say, "Welcome to the family." The most dangerous women in America's prisons may be locked away. But their influence now stretches farther than ever before, not through violence, but through legacy. Because prisons don't just hold people. They hold stories. And these stories, once born, never really die. They just find new voices to tell them. The Reformation, when society finally starts to listen. For decades, the story of America's most dangerous women was told as a warning, a tale of fear, control, and corruption behind prison walls. But as time passed, something unexpected began to happen. People stopped whispering about them in fear and started asking why they became who they were. For the first time, the system began to listen. The shift in perception. By the late 2020s, documentaries, podcasts, and criminal justice panels began re-examining the lives of women like Red, T-Bird, the Widow, and ICE, not as monsters, but as products of a broken world that created them. Psychologists called them case studies in survival through control. Dr. Helena Marquez, a prison behavioral expert, described it best in her 2028 lecture at Yale. When you strip someone of everything, freedom, dignity, purpose, power becomes the last thing they can own. These women didn't crave violence. They craved relevance. What shocked the public most wasn't their crimes. It was how these women adapted, organized, and maintained influence even in places designed to erase individuality. The same qualities that made them dangerous, intelligence, fearlessness, and strategy, were now being discussed as traits that could have led them to leadership if the world outside had given them a chance. The Widow's Redemption. Samantha Bell's story took the first public turn. Her writings, once dismissed as manipulative, began circulating in criminal justice reform groups. Activists started quoting her essays on emotional intelligence and trauma. Her words, "Control is quiet," became a mantra for women's rehabilitation programs nationwide. In 2029, a nonprofit group called the Second Mind Project was founded, inspired by her writings. Its goal, to teach emotional control and strategic thinking to incarcerated women, not as manipulation, but as survival skills turned into leadership. When asked why they chose her as inspiration, the founder said, "She was flawed, yes, but she understood the prison mind better than anyone." Who better to help rebuild it? It was irony at its peak. The most manipulative woman in Florida's history unknowingly sparked one of the largest reformation efforts in the country. ICE's quiet revolution. Back in Louisiana, Charlene "Ice" Porter became a symbol of calm reform. Wardens from other states began visiting St. Gabriel to study her impact on inmate behavior. They called it the ICE effect. She had no program, no title, no book deal. Just a way of leading by example. When younger inmates broke down or lashed out, she didn't lecture them. She'd sit in silence until they stopped talking, then say, "You can't fight the walls, but you can fight the person you used to be." Her quiet mentorship was unofficial, but it worked. Violent incidents dropped by 40% in her unit within 2 years. Even the warden admitted, "We don't know how she does it. We just know peace follows her." For the first time in history, a prison inmate became part of a training module for new correctional officers, teaching empathy, respect, and de-escalation. Not from books. From lived experience. T-Bird's code becomes law. Tonya, T-Bird, Harris never sought fame. But her unspoken rules of survival, respect, fairness, and order eventually shaped real prison policy. In 2030, New York's Department of Corrections introduced the Inmate Mediation and Peer Control Initiative, modeled after the self-governance structure T-Bird once built informally. The state saw a dramatic drop in disciplinary violence. Inmate-led peace councils became part of the official system. And in a moment of poetic justice, the woman who once ruled Bedford Hills through fear ended up inspiring the blueprint for peace. A retired warden said during a press interview, "We used to punish women like her for taking control. Now we train others to do the same thing, the right way." The ghost of Red. Red never reappeared. No confirmed sightings. No official reports. Some say she died in isolation. Others claim she's in witness protection after secretly assisting a federal investigation into staff corruption. But her legacy is alive. Her coded phrase, respect, loyalty, silence, has been reinterpreted by modern inmate advocacy groups as a mantra of unity and resilience, a way to build internal discipline instead of chaos. Her ghost became a symbol. A mural now stands on a concrete wall inside CCWF, painted by inmates in an art therapy program. It shows a faceless woman with red eyes and a crown of barbed wire. Underneath it, one sentence. "Even queens can rise from concrete." Society's awakening. By 2031, society began questioning not what these women did, but what made them that way. Media stopped glorifying violence and started exploring causes: poverty, trauma, abandonment, and generational pain. For the first time, prisons opened their doors to rehabilitation specialists, artists, and educators who used these stories not as entertainment, but as warnings and lessons. A former inmate once said on a podcast, "We grew up idolizing power because we never had safety. These women showed us that power can destroy, but it can also rebuild." The legacy reborn. Today, their names are taught in correctional psychology classes. Their stories are referenced in criminology textbooks. And their codes, once feared, are used as tools for understanding how leadership can emerge even from darkness. None of them will ever walk free in the way the world defines freedom. But in another sense, they already are. They've escaped the cages of silence that once defined them. In the end, the story of America's most dangerous women isn't about crime, it's about consequence. It's about what happens when strength has nowhere to go. And it's about how even the most feared can become the foundation of change. Because sometimes, history doesn't bury its monsters. It listens to them. Where the empire ends and the truth begins. The sun rises over razor wire. The yard is quiet, almost peaceful. From above, the prison looks like a gray island surrounded by emptiness. But inside those walls, something has changed. The cycle that began with chaos ends with understanding. This is where the empire ends, and where the truth finally begins. The last of the empire. It's been years since anyone uttered the names Red, T-Bird, the Widow, or ICE inside a correctional report. The system scrubbed their records, sealed their files, and replaced their stories with statistics. But legends don't fade with paperwork. They echo in the smallest places. A phrase written on a cell wall, a quiet act of kindness in the yard, a fight stopped before it begins. At the Central California Women's Facility, an older inmate walks past a group of young women arguing over a phone slot. She doesn't shout. She just says softly, respect, loyalty, silence. The argument stops. They nod and walk away. That's when you realize Red's words didn't die. They just found new voices. The Forgotten Letter. In 2033, during a renovation at St. Gabriel Correctional Center, workers discovered a small metal box hidden behind a loose tile in an old solitary wing. Inside was a single envelope. No name. No return address. Just one word written on the front, closure. Inside the envelope was a handwritten letter, perfectly neat, written in calm, deliberate strokes. If you're reading this, then time has done its job. We were never angels, and we were never demons. We were women who learned to survive a world that never wanted us strong. They called us dangerous because we refused to break. But danger and strength are twins, the same face in a different mirror. Don't worship us. Don't fear us. Just understand us. The letter was verified by handwriting experts. It belonged to Veronica Cruz. No one knows when she wrote it or how it got there. But that single note changed the way officials remembered her. The widow's final act. In Florida, Samantha Bell's essays were compiled into a book after her death in 2032. The title, Control is Quiet. It became a bestseller in academic circles, studied in law schools, referenced in behavioral psychology programs, and cited in congressional hearings about women's incarceration. The irony? Her final essay ended with the same sentence she used to manipulate people decades earlier, but now, it meant something completely different. The most dangerous person in the world is the one who finally learns the value of peace. It was her confession, her redemption, and her warning all at once. The bird that finally flew. Tonya T-Bird Harris lived long enough to see the system she once ruled turn her unspoken laws into official policy. At 62, she became the first woman in her facility's history to earn a degree in conflict resolution. She was still serving life, but she was no longer the feared name in whispers. She was Miss Harris, the inmate mentor. When a journalist asked her if she regretted her past, she answered simply, "You can't regret what pain teaches you. The question is whether you stay the same after it." The interviewer noted that when she said those words, her eyes looked calm, almost proud. The kind of peace you can't fake. The ice that finally melted. Charlene, Ice Porter outlived them all. By 2035, she was in her 60s, gray hair, slow walk, but still carrying that same quiet strength. She refused release twice, saying, "Freedom isn't a place. It's peace in your mind." One day, a young inmate asked her why she never wrote a book like the others. She smiled faintly and replied, "Books talk too much. Silence lasts longer." When she passed away in her sleep, the warden ordered the yard locked down for 10 minutes, not for security, but out of respect. Every inmate stood silently in the heat. No one moved. For 10 minutes, the entire prison honored the woman who taught them that control and compassion could live in the same soul. The truth beyond the walls. Today, the empire exists only in memory, but its impact lives far beyond the fences. Criminal justice programs use their stories to teach empathy and reform. Documentaries and podcasts explore the psychology of power and survival. And for once, the public doesn't look at these women as villains, but as mirrors reflecting what happens when society fails to protect its own. Because the truth isn't that they were born dangerous. It's that they were shaped by danger, molded by neglect, and forged by pain until power became their only language. And now, years later, their story stands as both a warning and a revelation, proof that even in the darkest corners of confinement, humanity can evolve. The last line. As one prison counselor wrote in a reflective essay, the system called them monsters. But maybe they were teachers. Teachers of what happens when pain goes unheard. Teachers of what control looks like when hope is gone. Their empire wasn't built on violence, it was built on survival. And maybe that's what makes this the most haunting truth of all. The world will always remember the most dangerous women in America's prisons. Not because of what they did, but because of what they became.